We tore into the area in question at significant speed. Reva had a lead foot. We left dust behind us in a huge cloud that hung in the air unmoving. There was no wind today, but the air was cooler and the landscape had turned from the red desert to the green and verdant fields of carefully cared for crops. This place seemed to be predominantly grains to the untrained eye. There was definitely signs of conflict here though, noticeable already. Charred patches of the fields and ground alongside the road, even the dirt still looked scarred and sooty black, with no recent rain or wind to disperse it. Something had burned here, something very hot. It had been an intense heat, but it had been localized. Probably a vehicle of some kind. I noticed the few trees that had shaded the road were shot up pretty hard too. Whatever had happened here had been no accident and lent validity to the reports I'd read. What I couldn't figure out was why no one from the city had come out to investigate yet. Something wasn't adding up. While I pondered the dilemma, I watched the agricultural drones that roamed the wide green plains. They searched for disease and deficiencies in the plants, while also monitoring the moisture levels and nutrients in the soil. They were the true workers of the farm in the traditional sense. The human element here was to maintain them and do the problem solving. AI had been outlawed, and while there was a blurry line between machine learning and true AI, most of the corps erred on the side of caution. These drones watched and collected data. They didn't make decisions. The only reason I knew any of this was because Les had grown up out here, in the sticks on one of these very communities. When he got drunk, he would rant about a more simple life. He was all talk though, and I knew he would never actually go back. Once you were in the city, it owned you. Something about it was like a siren's call. You knew it was going to kill you eventually, but you just had to hope it was going to be good before you died. We seemed to cross a line of sorts into the farm proper. A street sign read Site 43. Over it was graffitied, Forgotten. That's encouraging, Reva said with a scowl. I frowned. Accurate though. She started to apply the brakes as the silhouettes of outlying buildings came into view between the crops at the base of the huge columns that reached high into the sky. Those immense structures that left all beneath them in their shadow were like the feet of a titan. The small settlement that had been built up around the base of the stacks resembled a kind of shanty town, but one that had been given a minimal level of government funding. They didn't look like they had much to steal in the first place, and you'd be right for thinking that. You see, the land that these farmers were set up on used to belong to most of the people who were still here, or at least their families. But when the government needed space to build the stacks, well, they pretty much gave the occupants one option. Stay and work for the corpse, or we replace you with someone who will. Oh, and by the way, we'll give you a fraction of what your land is worth. Deal with it. There was no point fighting back. The corps had their own private armies and very few qualms about putting them to use. So yeah, these people looked like they got screwed hard, because they had. They'd been forced to adopt a lifestyle that they didn't actually want because it was better than nothing. And despite them being the backbone of the agricultural industry, they were paid cents to the dollar of what they should have been. The place was pretty active though. Everyone here worked after all, and they worked 24/7. A handful of vehicles were parked in a row nearby. I noticed one was a little white hatchback. It stood out from the lineup for not being a ute or dirty. It had a 1-800 number and a tagline, Hire Me. There were people moving about the buildings, mostly workers, most dressed in blue coveralls with silver reflective stripes crossing their chests and back. Here too were massive signs of scorch marks and conflict. A signpost directed between the buildings towards deliveries and site office. We turned down a short road that led towards the site office and stopped at a series of demountable offices that were clearly not being demounted anytime soon. Everything here was built to be portable, but the workers had realized that most of what was here to stay, and they'd modified the structures. Did you see that? Reva asked, nodding toward a patch of ground that had just passed out of our sight. I grimaced. I counted at least a dozen mounds of earth. Her jaw was set hard, and a couple looked pretty small. I ground my teeth. As we parked off to one side, I opened my eyes to my Cyphers sight and saw the lines of blue that denoted data streams moving from the security cameras at the back of the offices. Inside the foremost of those was a jumble of cables, hardware, and other industrial-level tech, plus a few bodies, live ones. Two of the bodies in particular paused in their actions as we turned off the car. They both looked in the same direction to one side, seeing us on a monitor most likely. There was a brief discussion as Reva and I got out of the car. "Don't move, we wait here." She looked around the compound and nodded to two workers who had stopped to eyeball us. "They're coming to us, I take it?" I nodded. Everyone here's on edge. Their heart rates are all higher than usual when they saw us. I don't blame them. I ran my eye over the sheds that were spread across the other side of the unofficial car park. Even from this distance, I could see they showed signs of forced entry. People out here are suspicious of outsiders on a good day. The only reason they haven't held us at gunpoint yet is I can't see any decent weaponry that isn't a personal sidearm. As I said this, the door to the office opened and two people stepped out. One was human, short brown hair, the face of a man in his 30s, tattoos adorning his upper arms. The lower half had been given over to high-tech augmentations. Not aggressive ones, though. These all had the telltale signs of a mechanical engineer or some such specialist. He was toting a shotgun. "You were saying?" "That's a sidearm." "For who, a troll?" I rolled my eyes. The other individual was a gnome. Very heavily modified for such a small guy. Gnomes, like goblins, didn't have much capacity for mods, and this guy looked like he'd pushed himself as far as possible with the augmentations. Huge parts of his head had been replaced with shiny silvery alloys. The marks of subdermal circuitry ran over his face, and his eyes had been replaced with red orbs, so common on military types. Low on looks, high on practicality. All four of his limbs had been upgraded too, more so than the human. They stopped a few meters before us, the shotgun being held loose, but in both hands, ready to be raised if needed. "G'day," I said in my least threatening manner. They didn't reply. Both of them just stood there, like they'd been waiting for something. I tried not to be annoyed, but it had been a long drive. "So, are we gonna stare each other down like some cowboy shit, or are you guys gonna speak up?" The human grimaced. "This site's for workers only. Nothing of interest here for tourists." "If you are tourists," the gnome put in, "if you're something else." He left the last part unspoken, and I saw his hand twitch over a revolver holstered to his hip. I put one of my hands up and moved the other slowly and deliberately. I didn't feel like becoming target practice today, but with my other hand I pulled out my badge and held it up. The gnome had twitched as my hand had gone inside my pocket, but I clearly wasn't stashing anything too deadly in my jeans. "Got anything here for hunters?" The shotgun swung into a loose grip as he let go with his offhand, then flipped it up to rest it on his shoulder. "You're with the orc, then?" "In a way. My name's Ulf, this is my partner Reva. The orc is a professional acquaintance." The human nodded and took a few steps forward. "He said he was expecting some help. Bit late, though." I didn't like the sound of that. "Why? What happened?" He didn't reply to my question, but he did introduce himself. "I'm Shane, or Shaz if you like. This is Hilsey. I'm one of the site supervisors. He's the lead chemist. You better come with us." They didn't wait for a reply, they just started walking. They didn't go back inside the demountable either, they passed us by, heading across the compound to one of the sheds. We fell in behind them. They didn't seem to be in a hurry. "What do you mean we're too late?" Reva spoke up. "What happened to Hercule?" "That's his name. He was going by Mason." I allowed myself an internal chuckle at that. I knew how he felt about his name. "Enough with the vague replies," Reva said sharply. "What happened?" Shaz looked over his shoulder. "Easier if you just see for yourself." As we crossed the intervening space, I took the time to look around at the workforce. I noticed something. Are there any greenskins working here? Everyone I could see were either elves or human or half elves, except the gnome in front of me. For an industrial site, it was odd not to see a goblin or two. They thrived in these environments. It was strange. Even a troll would have made sense somewhere. Very perceptive, Eagle Eye. You know this is a Ptolemine Inc. site, right? Reaver shrugged. So? So, they don't hire Green. Not unless they have to. Even Hilsey here only got in because he's so good at what he does. And I was the only applicant at the time. They were desperate. We reached the entrance to one of the sheds. The door wasn't a sheet of tin on a steel frame like the other doors, though. It was more like something at home in a lab. It slid open automatically, and the smell of antiseptics and sterilization chemicals hit me in the face. This is our med bay, Hilsey said, leading the way. We don't have much to work with here. We don't actually suffer many injuries. Usually. To top it off, the recent raids have been stripping us of any new kit. It was basic. I'd seen field hospitals with more equipment than this. They did have a decent array of MRUs, though, machines that were a kind of advanced three-dimensional printer. I assumed they probably had some heavy-duty ones for manufacturing parts and for maintenance on the site, probably stashed away in other sheds. They were handy for making new bits and pieces for augments or tools. We followed the two of them inside, through an array of tables, some lab equipment, and a bed at the back was surrounded by a curtain. Hilsey grabbed one side of the curtain and slid it back, the clicking of the steel curtain rings loud in the silent med bay. Hercule lay on the bed, stripped down to the waist and hooked up to a series of monitors. His body was unharmed, mostly, a few cuts and bruises. His augments seemed undamaged, and his muscular build showed he was at least physically healthy. His face was impassive and calm. His heart rate and other vitals were displayed on the screen, and they had all been muted. From what little even I knew, all the numbers looked good. What the hell? Reaver exclaimed. I'm guessing he's not just asleep. Shaz shook his head. I'm gonna assume you know what's been happening here. Well, he tried to confront the Harlequins on their last raid, took a couple of them down, and then gave them an ultimatum. They gave him a virus. The Harlequins? Reaver inquired, taking her eyes off the big orc for a second. Yeah, a local band of raiders, I cut him off. Ex-military group. They were deployed into some questionable areas about a decade ago, but they caused more problems than they solved. They were disowned and condemned. Yeah, well, some of them are still causing problems on my site, to my people, Shaz replied. I ground my teeth. I knew them. Fuck, I'd worked with them. They were like rabid dogs compared to what I had been back in the day. I wouldn't trust a Harlequin to walk down the street without wasting someone and jacking their car just for shits and giggles. What the fuck are they doing here, though? I thought they were all up north, making trouble for the NT TAC teams and the Sirens. Hilsey shrugged. Came south for the summer. Fuck knows. All I know is they're here now. They've been hitting us on and off for the last couple of months, leaving us just enough gear to survive, not letting anyone leave to get help. But we got in okay, Reaver said skeptically. Oh, they don't mind you coming in, it's the going out they object to. I shook my head, trying to understand. But why would they come all this way just to harass farmers? You can't be making them that much money, you're just one station. No one had an answer. I sighed. I rolled up my sleeves and took up a position next to the bed, looking down at my big buddy through my other sight. First things first. Any idea what kind of virus it is? Shaz shook his head. Hilsey shrugged. All I can tell is that he's unconscious, but they've left his body ticking over just fine. I ran a hand down the stubble that I hadn't quite had a chance to shave off yet, and eyed the patient. He was a big lad, and I needed to maintain a good standard of physical contact to do what I needed to in a good time. The bed was moulded to the wall. I couldn't get behind it to the head of the bed to get comfortable in a seated position and lay both my hands on his head. It only left one option, unfortunately. He's not gonna like this, I said. Yellow glyphs lit the air around my hands, and I swung one leg over the bed and hoisted myself into position, straddling the massive orc's chest. Hey, what the? Shaz took a few steps forward, but Reva laid a hand on his shoulder, halting him. I find it's best if you just humor him. I took in a deep breath, began to clear my mind, and closed my eyes. If I pass out, just try and catch me. I didn't wait for objections, placing my hands on his temples and dropping into his mind. This was where the magic of the cipher melded with modern technology of cybernetics and neuroscience. Cranial implants were the hardware that most people took to have integrated comms and basic streaming and storage functions. I had the bare minimum of these because my mind was already capable of everything that they could do, bar taking calls and streaming TV, the basic HUD stuff. But Hercule, like so many, had gone so far as to install augmentations needed to allow him to interface with other computers and advanced hardware. While this wasn't truly hacking, I also had the luxury of being able to bypass all the menus and the visual layout that he and most others would encounter when first opening up access to another's mind. Don't get me wrong, it was harder than it sounded, but I'd done it 100 times before. Back when I'd first started testing my abilities, this would have taken me hours to achieve. Now, however, it was mostly Almar tech as well, which I was extremely familiar with. They were very common suppliers to the militaries all over the world. They were good at hardware, but their raw programming and software was not up to the same level as, say, Merlin tech. I had also built up a series of protocols over the years to speed this up. It had been one of the more unsavory parts of my job for so long that this, even though I was helping out a friend, left a sour taste in my mouth. He was a friend, and that also made a difference. I had to be careful. One wrong move in here and I could leave him a vegetable drooling on the slab. If I was just trying to be invasive and load a whole virus or a burn or something, that would have been easier. They don't need to slip past silently and not damage anything on the way through. They were meant to cause harm. It was easier to be destructive. I didn't know what was lurking in here either. Was it just a basic virus, some kind of aggressive AI? Was it contagious? On top of that, I was trying to circumnavigate his firewalls and defensive programs. Though none of them had been tailored to combat a cipher, and that was a fact not a lot of people found out until it was too late. In real time, I took about 15 minutes to break my view of things down into basic code. I could see the problem immediately. It wasn't anything so fancy as an AI, which would have been massively illegal. It really was pretty straightforward, though advanced in its execution. His code had been replaced, rapidly but flawlessly, with new protocols that stopped him from being able to interact with his body. If you were to do any basic scans on him, everything would seem perfectly fine. An advanced diagnosis, though, would have shown he was trapped in his own brain. All his base motor functions were still fully operable because they weren't governed by his augmentations, but anything to do with conscious actions had been severed. He was too heavily hardwired to all his body parts. There wasn't anything on him that wasn't upgraded just a little bit. This meant that all his conscious mental processes, walking, talking, opening his eyes, speech, they were all rerouted via a cranial implant known as an NPU, or Neural Processing Unit. This was to allow for maximum integration with his gear. This was a level of integration I was used to seeing in the military, in government, in high-end industrial workers, not to mention the criminal underground and rich arse-hats who had more money than brain cells. I lumped those two together, not by accident. An NPU was the most efficient way to do things, and the safest. Your body and your gear was about as in sync as it could possibly be. Backstreet cutters wouldn't be able to manage this sort of thing without some serious hardware of their own and a neurosurgeon to tie it all together. Well, I just had to re-establish the connections. As I picked at the vital threads of code, I wondered why they'd used this virus. There was other viruses out there that would kill, or at least do a little bit more damage. I had seen this exact program before. We used it in service. That was where the Harlequins had stolen it from. When we had deployed it though, it was to transport extremely dangerous prisoners without damaging them, or having them damage us. It gave us time to pick over their minds and bodies, seeing if there was anything we wanted or needed before the interrogation. Then it hit me. They had done this so that when their opportunity to come back had arisen, they could strip him for parts at their leisure. Well, shit, that meant two things. These guys were out to make money or out for self-improvement. And more importantly, they were definitely coming back. I was too deeply distracted by my own thoughts, and I missed a tripwire. Just as I deleted some code and prepared to slice my own patchwork back in, the program began to execute. It manifested in an overlay of code in the new window, rapidly appearing and scrolling as though it was being typed at a feverish pace. Fuck. So there was a failsafe. I tried to decipher it as it ran past my vision. As far as I could make out, it was an emergency self-destruct of some sort. Now, it wasn't just a case of slowly debugging him. I had to stop a cancer that was spreading fast. I spread my conscience thin, doing the mental equivalent of juggling chainsaws, knives, and fire all at the same time as reciting the alphabet backwards. I was racing, doing my best to cut off its progression before it reached its targets, trying to spike it, trying my best to wipe away the characters, denoting chaos to come. I was furiously rewriting code. The virus, now that it had been found and was being deconstructed, was opting for all-out destruction. To one side of the display, his vitals, pulled from his own diagnostic programs, were beginning to spike badly. His heart rate was going to burst it through his chest. His brain was displaying signs of deprivation of oxygen. If I didn't get this sorted fast, he was going to flatline or go brain dead. To the three people watching, all this unfolded in a matter of seconds. Hercule's body began to shudder and twitch. I had gone rigid like I was frozen in ice, but I maintained contact. In my reality, it was a drawn-out, fast-paced battle of my ability to control an aggressive virus with ice, both pre-designed and some cowboy shit I was adapting on the fly. A light at the end of the tunnel. The walls I was building were starting to stem the flow. I was making progress. Hercule's vitals began to level out. The corrupted codes stopped advancing as my own yellow hieroglyphics overtook them. In all the chaos, though, I had learned something important. The virus that had actually done the initial shutdown of Hercule's system was a sleeper. It didn't have to be activated when it entered his system. It could have laid dormant for an indeterminate amount of time, hiding deep in his programming until activated. Before it had been switched on, it would have been almost undetectable. Then the victim could have been switched off in a blink. Or worse than that, with a little effort they could take control. Not a puppet the same way that a Cypher could puppet, a very crude and basic version. I wondered if anyone else in the area had been affected. They might not know. I doubted anyone had had time to check. As for my orc buddy, if I didn't rip the core code from his system, in the future this could happen all over again, much easier. I relaxed at last. The corruption isolated, the virus and its failsafe contained in an assembly of firewalls and a little cipher magic. I had two options. Delete it, or I wondered if my face betrayed the smile I was feeling. It wasn't dead, not yet. I'd trapped it like a snake in a sack. Inside another sack, inside a steel box. I wasn't taking any chances. Not that it would have had the same effect on me. I controlled all my augmentations directly with magic. I had no internal NPU. I was the NPU, and my brain was almost unhackable and far more efficient. Sure, you could hack my gear, but you couldn't actually get inside my head the same way you could get into others. I ended up rewriting some of his core programming. Not in a major way, well, maybe a little. My gift to him. It was cheeky of me, but if anyone went inside in the future, they would find a smattering of cipher code in here, alien and obscure. I was leaving behind some fail-safes of my own to keep him a little bit safer in the future, as best I could without any serious reprogramming of his major software. When I finally emerged from the depths of Hercule's mind, it was like breaking through the surface of water. Light flooded my sight, I breathed in deep, and straight away felt an ache in my body from my awkward position atop the other hunter. If I'd been quicker to react, or if I'd been in there less time, and not been so fucking sore, I would have dismounted him before he woke up. Instead, his eyes opened, His breathing increased its rate, the pupils dilated, and they adjusted to the light. He squinted, taking in the view, then worked the dryness out of his mouth before speaking. "Black Dog, why are you dry humping me?" I was lucky that Hercule, or Mason as he sometimes preferred, was such a chilled out guy. Most orcs would have thrown me off in the best of circumstances, or started tearing parts off me in the worst case. Still, that didn't make it any less awkward. After we'd sorted all that out, and I'd explained to Hilsey and Shaz what I'd done, Hercule started to fill me in on why he was out here. "You want the long version or the short version?" "Let's start with the short version. I'll ask questions if I want more details. How about that?" He leant back on the bed. Its head had been lifted to give him a bit more of a sitting position. All the monitoring equipment had been removed. "As you know, I mainly sub out on contract to the Corps as a sort of government loaner. But in this case, it was a personal request by my uncle." I asked my first question. "Your uncle being—" "Mason Baelish." "Isn't Mason your last name, though?" He shrugged. "Uncle Baelish is the head of the family. It's a tradition in our family that the head takes on the surname as a sort of title. If I was referring to him formally, he would be known as the Mason." Reva spoke up. "It's like that in a lot of the old orc families, even mine, though ours was a little bit more barbaric with its title." Mason nodded along, looking at her with what I thought was a touch of sympathy. "Goes that way sometimes." He turned back to me. "So anyway, I got a message that I was being personally requested to investigate a potential frame-up on Uncle Baelish's enterprises on the West Coast." "In what respect?" I asked, curious. "In short, those bombings missed anything to do with him. Then a series of deliveries that he had brokered to be sent out to sites like this and then take the goods back to the city, they get hijacked and then show up on the black market. He managed to get hold of some of the reports Shaz here had sent that somehow were never received by Ptolemine Inc. Rumors started circulating about a dirty deal. People very pointedly not looking at him. They think he's hijacking his own goods post-sale and doubling down on the profit on the underground." Hercule nodded. "It's all bullshit, but at this point it's a personal pride thing. He's already made the sale. It's not costing him anything, but this isn't good for business long term." Reva spoke up. "So who's losing out here? Sierra?" "We are," Shaz interjected. "It's our meds, parts, raw materials. They even hit the outgoing orders of food." "But you're nobody. No offense. But as a fat sack of cash recently told me, you're clearly not the target here. You just happen to be caught in the crossfire." Hilsey nodded in agreement, surprisingly level-headed. "Follow the money, that's what you're saying." "Usually works," I confirmed. "So where does that actually lead? Who's benefiting the most from this? After the raiders hand off the goods, where's the lion's share go?" Our conversation was cut short as an alarm sounded outside the medbay. "Looks like you're going to get a chance to ask them firsthand," Shaz said, picking up his shotgun from where it rested against the wall. The two of them moved fast. Reva and I went far behind. Hercule brought up the rear, lethargic and weak from his days in bed. As we left the medical shed, I could already see a cloud of red dust rising over the tree line. It glowed in the low light. The sun had begun to go down while we were busy inside, and dusk was setting in. The cloud grew and trailed out in the breeze as the intruders closed in on the site. I looked up at Hercule with a squint. "You ever see that old black and white movie, Seven Samurai?" He shook his head, the thick muscles of his neck standing out as his eyes tracked the dust cloud. "Nah, but I saw that kids movie once, the one with the ants and the grasshoppers. The one with the massive caterpillar. Same story, innit?" I smiled at the reference, despite the severity of what was about to happen. "Well, beautiful butterfly, we've got grasshoppers incoming." Thank you for listening to Cyphers Edge. Subscribe so as not to miss future episodes. New episodes uploaded every second Saturday. Script and narration by JJ Brandis. Music was provided by Cale McLeish. Copyright JJ Brandis 2025.